Gentlemen, exactly 30 days after the tragic Air India crash that claimed the lives of 260 innocent people, the AAIB, or the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, has released its preliminary report regarding the cause of the disaster. This 15-page report focuses on a critical aspect: the fuel supply to the engines that was cut off immediately after takeoff. And according to this report, the pilots attempted to restart the engines. One engine partially recovered while the other failed to respond before impact. But what is interesting is that the conversation recorded between the pilots soon after taking off and realizing about the malfunction. Amita.
Absolutely. As per this report, now what is being said that one of the pilots asked his co-pilot or the other pilot, we don't know the conversation that happened, who was saying what, but why did he press the fuel cutoff switches, which happened at the time gap of just 1 second. Now the report, however, mentions that the other pilot responded by saying that he did not. Now this report further indicates that moments later, one engine scored deceleration that stopped and began to recover. However, the other engine could not stop decelerating despite repeated attempts to reintroduce fuel in order to increase core speed and to facilitate recovery. That means that the plane was in maximum speed, but it did not have the required fuel for continuing with its flight.
Absolutely, and this report also states that the pilots had an adequate rest period before operating the flight. The crew underwent the pre-flight breath analyzer test, which found them fit for duty. Let's take this across to our reporters joining us. Our guests are also with us. But let me go across to Sabyasachi and Arunil, who are with us. Sabyasachi, very, very important to look at these findings because it ultimately boils down to what was happening inside the cockpit. One of the pilots asked the other if he switched off the engine, and he says no. How then did the switches magically switch off? That's a very, very key question that we don't have the answer for at the moment. Sabyasachi.
Well, that's right. See, that is a very important question. We don't have the answer right now, whether it was because of technical fault or whether it was because of human error. See, if you remember, the DGCA had thoroughly inspected all the remaining 787 Boeing fleets of Air India, and the DGCA has given a clean sheet. But if you remember back in 2018 itself, one of the US aviation regulator has highlighted the disengagement of the fuel engine switch, the lock part, and in fact they have highlighted that time and again. So whether that was thoroughly checked before the takeoff by the maintenance or not, that remains the question, because till now the initial report highlights that this could have possibly led to the fatal accident, but whether it was a human error or whether it happened because of technical fault, that particular aspect has not been mentioned in the preliminary report. That is the reason why the investigators have pointed out that the investigation is going on. They are yet to evaluate the remaining of the evidences, and that is the reason why they have also sought the details from the stakeholders as well in this regard. But clearly a lot of reactions coming in social media, where a lot of the people are coming out who does not agree what has been come out in the preliminary report by the AAIB. Their questions that it could not happen. So a lot of speculations are going around, but if you go by the initial findings, they suggest that because of the fuel engine was switched to cut off, that could possibly have resulted to the loss of thrust.
Of course, there's been a statement both by Air India and also by Boeing that has been released. We'll take you through them, but Arunil is also connected with us. Arunil, for the moment, as far as the viewers were watching the broadcast, they want to know exactly, when it comes to the said reasons, what has now been ruled out completely. That has also been mentioned as far as in this report is concerned. What led to this tragedy after all, and what could have not been the factors actually that played out when it comes to resulting in this catastrophic crash?
Well, after this horrific crash took place, there were many theories that were floating around, Amita. One was bird head, and another was dual engine failure. It seems like the AAIB's preliminary report, it gives a very conclusive evidence to it, a conclusive reason to it, that why exactly the flight immediately crashed after taking off. It basically mentions that the fuel from the fuel tank stopped reaching both the engines, and because of that this crash has taken place. Now, why exactly the fuel stopped flowing from the fuel tanks to the dual engines, that reason is not been made clear as yet. Whether the AIB is aware of it and it does not want to give out much details in their preliminary report itself. They want to further investigate. That is what they have said. They have sought evidences and details from all the stakeholders in this case be it Air India, be it Boeing. But to simplify for our viewers, it basically establishes the sequence of events as well. Exactly at 1 p.m. 38 minutes 42 seconds, this is when the fuel switch, it changed from running to switch off. The pilot, one of the pilot, asked the other pilot, why did you switch off? The other pilot is responding saying, no, I have not done that. And immediately within 20 seconds, a communication is made with the ATC as well by the pilot in command calling Mayday. While the ATC responded to the Mayday call, it was unfortunately the crash had taken place. Unfortunately, it was all over for the 260 innocent lives who were traveling on board. The baffling question over here is, many people on social media are also asking this question, that yes, a conclusive report, preliminary report is being given out by the AIB, but whether a mere switch can decide the lives or the future of 260 individuals who are traveling on board this Boeing 787 aircraft. Whether there was any foul play that was being done, whether there was any third person who was present inside the cockpit, all these questions clearly come to the fore. There are two critical evidences that the AIB basically is depending on. Basically, it is the black box, the flight data recorder, which mentions about the fact that the N2 value of both the engines fell below the ideal minimum speed, as well as the cockpit data recorder, which we were discussing about, basically which covered the communication between both the pilots. Whether that
and you know, there are two aspects of this, Arunil, that needs to be kept in mind. Both I'm requesting Sabyasachi and Arunil to both stay with us. I'm going to take it across to our guests, Parvez Dabania, Phil Dudley, Mr. M.R. Shivaraman, as well as Dr. Vandana Singh joining us. I'd like to come across to you first, Phil. Phil, now one of the things that we know is that if there is an engine failure, some of the textbook responses of pilots is to switch on and switch off in that situation. However, that doesn't seem to be the case over here, because one pilot is asking the other, and we don't know which at the moment because the details of the CVR are still very sketchy, but one is certainly asking the other if they switched off the engine, the other responds saying no. Now, in this situation, what are we to make of this? Is there any possibility that the engine switch could have been flipped without human intervention? Phil Dudley.
Well, that's totally impossible. The switches are mechanically locked into a position for fuel on or fuel off. So there's only 3 times that the pilots will touch those switches, and that is when they start the engines, when they shut the engines off, or if there's an emergency and they have to shut the engine down, for a fire or an engine failure. But other than that, there's no other time that those switches will be touched.
Right. And Mr. Shivaraman, if I can bring you in on this, what then could have caused this engine failure for the fuel to stop reaching the engine?